The first body was found on a Tuesday morning, floating face down in the obsidian waters of Black Lake, arms outstretched as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. Sheriff Marcus Kane had seen his share of drownings in his 23 years of service, but this one felt different. The victim, a local photographer named David Chen, was an excellent swimmer who'd grown up on these very shores. More disturbing still was the expression frozen on his waterlogged face. Not the peaceful resignation of drowning, but wide-eyed terror, mouth agape in a silent scream that seemed to echo across the still water. "Another tourist mishap," Deputy Sarah Martinez muttered, pulling her jacket tighter against the October chill as they watched the coroner's team load the body into their van. But Kane knew better. David wasn't a tourist. He'd been documenting the lake for months, part of some environmental project for the state university, and tourists didn't venture to Black Lake anymore, not since the old resort closed down 15 years ago. The lake sat like a wound in the earth, perfectly circular and impossibly deep, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to lean inward, as if the trees themselves were drawn to its dark waters. Local legend claimed it was bottomless, though geological surveys put its depth at roughly 400 feet, still deeper than any natural lake had a right to be in this part of Colorado. The Ute tribes had avoided it for centuries, calling it the place where spirits go to weep. But white settlers had dismissed such warnings as primitive superstition. Kane wished they'd listened. The second death came exactly 1 week later. This time it was Margaret Holloway, a 73-year-old retiree who'd moved to the area just 6 months prior, seeking the peace and quiet of mountain life. Her neighbor found her car parked at the old boat launch, keys still in the ignition, purse untouched on the passenger seat. Margaret's body was discovered 3 hours later by the volunteer search team, floating in the exact same spot where David Chen had been found. The coroner, Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, was a no-nonsense woman who'd worked in Denver for 30 years before semi-retiring to their small mountain community. She called Kane with her preliminary findings, her usually steady voice tinged with confusion. "Marcus, I've been doing this for 4 decades and I've never seen anything quite like this," she said, the phone crackling with static. "Both victims drowned, that's clear enough. Water in the lungs, all the typical signs. But there's something else. Something I can't explain." Kane felt his stomach tighten. "What is it, Doc?" "Their brain activity. I know how that sounds, but hear me out. I found unusual neural patterns in the tissue samples, almost like they experienced some kind of intense electrical activity just before death. And there's more. Both bodies show signs of rapid eye movement, as if they were dreaming or hallucinating right up until the end." Kane stared out his office window toward the distant shimmer of Black Lake. "Any idea what could cause that?" "None whatsoever. I'm sending samples to Denver for further analysis, but Marcus, I think we might have a problem on our hands." The third victim arrived like clockwork, 7 days later. James Morrison, a hiker from Boulder who'd been camping in the national forest nearby. This time, Kane was ready. He'd spent the past week researching everything he could find about Black Lake, diving deep into historical records, geological surveys, and Native American oral histories. What he found chilled him more than the October wind that now carried the first hints of winter. The lake had a pattern. Every few decades, people started dying. Always drownings, always unexplained, always in the same general location. The deaths would cluster over a period of months, sometimes years, then stop abruptly. The last cluster had been in 1987, when 5 people died over the course of a single summer. Before that, 1962, 1938, 1911. Going back through old newspaper archives, Kane found references stretching into the 1800s, though record-keeping had been spotty in the early days, but this time felt different. The intervals between deaths were getting shorter, and there was something else, something that made Kane's hands shake as he pored over the files late into the night. Each cluster coincided with periods of unusual seismic activity. Minor earthquakes, barely noticeable to most but recorded by the Geological Survey. The kind of deep, rumbling tremors that suggested something stirring far beneath the earth. Dr. Sarah Chen, David's sister and a geophysicist at Colorado State, arrived in town 3 days after James Morrison's body was pulled from the lake. She was a small woman with fierce dark eyes and the kind of focused intensity that reminded Kane of a hunting hawk. She'd driven down from Fort Collins the moment she heard about her brother's death, and she wasn't buying the official story. David was investigating something, she told Kane over coffee at the town's only diner, her hands wrapped around her mug as if seeking warmth. He'd been acting strange the past few weeks, talking about unusual electromagnetic readings around the lake. He was convinced there was some kind of geological anomaly down there. Kane leaned forward. What kind of anomaly? He wouldn't say exactly. David was always secretive about his work until he was sure of his findings, but he mentioned detecting unusual mineral deposits, something about crystalline formations that didn't match the surrounding geology. She pulled out a tablet, swiping through what looked like scientific data. I've been analyzing his last batch of readings, the ones he uploaded to the university server just hours before he died. The data meant nothing to Kane, just squiggly lines and numbers, but Sarah's expression grew increasingly troubled as she scrolled through it. "This is impossible," she whispered. "What?" "These electromagnetic signatures. They're not random. There's a pattern here, almost like—" She trailed off, her face paling. "Like what, Dr. Chen?" "Like a heartbeat. A very slow, very deep heartbeat coming from the bottom of the lake." That night, Kane found himself standing at the shore of Black Lake, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the star-filled sky like a mirror. It was beautiful in its way, but there was something deeply unsettling about that beauty, like staring into the eye of some vast sleeping creature. His radio crackled. "Sheriff, we've got another one." Kane closed his eyes. "Where?" "Same spot. Young woman this time, maybe 25. Her ID says Rebecca Torres, address in Denver." As Kane drove toward the scene, his headlights cutting through the mountain darkness, he made a decision. Whatever was happening at Black Lake, it was escalating. 4 deaths in 4 weeks, and if the pattern held, there would be more. Many more. The next morning, Kane called in every favor he had, reaching out to contacts in the FBI, the CDC, even the Department of Energy. Most dismissed his concerns, but Dr. Elena Vasquez from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences agreed to send a team. She arrived 2 days later with a van full of equipment and 3 graduate students who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Sheriff Kane, I'm Dr. Vasquez. I have to admit your report was unusual. Mass drownings aren't typically in our wheelhouse, but the neurological symptoms you described caught our attention." Dr. Vasquez was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm competence that came from years of investigating environmental disasters. She set up a base camp at the old resort, her team working around the clock to collect water samples, measure radiation levels, and conduct geological surveys. Meanwhile, Kane established a perimeter around the lake, posting deputies to turn away any potential visitors. But on the 6th night of their investigation, Deputy Martinez radioed in with disturbing news. "Sheriff, we've got a problem. There's a whole group of people walking toward the lake from the east, must be 20 or 30 of them, all in a line, moving real slow." Kane grabbed his radio. "Stop them. Don't let anyone near the water." "That's just it, sir. They're not responding. It's like they can't hear me." Kane raced to the scene, his patrol car sliding on the gravel road as he took the curves too fast. When he arrived, he found Martinez standing beside her vehicle, her face pale in the headlight glare. Beyond her, barely visible in the darkness, was a line of people walking steadily toward the lake. Men, women, teenagers, all moving with the same slow, deliberate pace, their eyes fixed straight ahead. "How long have they been like this?" Kane asked. "About 20 minutes. I tried to intercept them, but they just walk around me like I'm not even there." Kane approached the nearest figure, a middle-aged man in pajamas and slippers. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" He waved his hand in front of the man's face, but there was no response. The man's eyes were open but unfocused, like someone deep in sleep. Then Kane noticed something that made his blood run cold. All of the sleepwalkers were breathing in perfect synchronization, their chests rising and falling in rhythm with each other. And underneath their synchronized breathing, so low he almost missed it, was a sound like distant thunder, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from the earth itself. The heartbeat Sarah Chen had detected was getting stronger. Kane called for backup from neighboring counties, but before help could arrive, the sleepwalkers reached the lake's edge. Without hesitation, the first person, a teenage girl in a nightgown, waded into the water. The others followed one by one, disappearing beneath the dark surface with barely a splash. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered. "What do we do?" Kane was already moving, kicking off his boots and diving into the lake. The water was shockingly cold, like being stabbed with 1,000 icy needles, but he pushed forward, grabbing for the nearest person. The teenage girl was just a few feet away, but as his fingers brushed her arm, something extraordinary happened. He could see. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper, something that bypassed normal vision entirely. The lake wasn't empty, it was full of light, vast and brilliant and alien. And at the bottom, impossibly far below, something was stirring. Something enormous and ancient that had been sleeping for centuries, maybe millennia, feeding on the electromagnetic energy of the earth itself. But it wasn't malevolent. Kane understood that in a flash of insight that came from somewhere beyond rational thought. The entity, for lack of a better word, wasn't killing people. It was calling to them, reaching out across dimensions through the unique geological properties of Black Lake, trying to communicate with the only intelligent life it had encountered in eons of solitude. The drownings weren't murders, they were failed translations. Kane surfaced, gasping, his mind reeling with impossible knowledge. The sleepwalkers were floating now, not sinking, held up by some force that defied physics. Their faces were peaceful, no longer showing the terror of the earlier victims. They were communing with something vast and incomprehensible, but the human brain simply wasn't equipped for such contact. "Kane!" Dr. Vasquez was calling from the shore, her voice barely audible over the growing pulse that now seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's fully active now." That's when Kane understood. The entity wasn't trying to harm anyone. It was dying. After eons of isolation, it had finally detected other intelligent life and was desperately trying to make contact before its long existence came to an end. But human minds weren't capable of direct interface with such an alien intelligence. The neural overload was killing people. Unless Kane dove again, deeper this time, following the pull of that massive consciousness. The light grew brighter as he descended, and he felt his own mind beginning to fracture under the pressure of contact. But instead of fighting it, he embraced it, opening himself completely to the alien presence. Images flooded his consciousness, vast cities of crystalline light spanning worlds he couldn't name. Civilizations rising and falling across cosmic timescales. The slow, patient journey of this being across the void between stars, seeking others like itself, finding only empty worlds and silent space until it detected the faint electromagnetic whisper of Earth's developing biosphere. It had come here to sleep, to wait, to dream of the day when Earth's children might grow wise enough to speak with it as equals. But time had run out. The entity was ancient beyond measure, and its long exile was coming to an end. Kane felt its loneliness like a physical weight, crushing and absolute. But he also felt its hope, its desperate desire to leave something behind before the darkness claimed it. Not knowledge exactly. Human minds were too different, too limited to comprehend such vastness. But perhaps a gift. The lake began to glow, a soft phosphorescence that started at the depths and spread upward like liquid light. The sleepwalkers were changing, their faces serene now, their bodies surrounded by coronas of gentle radiance. They were still breathing, still alive, but transformed in ways Kane couldn't fully understand. As the light reached the surface, Kane felt the entity's presence begin to fade. But before it departed entirely, it touched his mind one last time, not with words, but with pure meaning. Remember, tell them. They are not alone. The lake erupted in a pillar of light that turned night into day, visible for hundreds of miles in every direction. When it faded, the water was crystal clear for the first time in recorded history, and 31 people were floating peacefully on its surface, very much alive and utterly changed. Dr. Vasquez later described what she witnessed in clinical terms. A localized electromagnetic phenomenon of unknown origin, resulting in the apparent restructuring of certain neural pathways in exposed subjects. But Kane knew better. The dead entity had given its last gift to humanity. Not knowledge they couldn't handle, but something far more precious. The survivors, Kane included, found themselves changed in subtle but profound ways. They could sense electromagnetic fields, predict earthquakes days in advance, and most remarkably, they seemed to have developed a form of limited telepathy, able to share thoughts and emotions with others who had been touched by the lake's light. They became, in essence, early prototypes of what humanity might someday become when it was ready to join the vast community of intelligent life scattered across the cosmos, living bridges between the present and a future where loneliness itself would become extinct. The deaths at Black Lake had ended not in tragedy, but in transformation. The lake itself became a place of pilgrimage, its waters now crystal clear and somehow alive with possibility. Scientists came from around the world to study the phenomenon, but they could never quite capture what had really happened in their instruments and equations. Kane retired 6 months later, moving to a small cabin overlooking the lake. He spent his days writing, trying to find words for experiences that existed beyond language, and his nights standing at the shore, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, and knowing with absolute certainty that humanity's greatest adventure was yet to come. Sometimes, on very clear nights when the stars seemed unusually bright, he could still feel it, a vast presence moving among the constellations, patient and eternal, watching over the countless worlds where life was learning to reach beyond itself toward something greater. And in those moments, Thomas Kane knew that death was not an ending but a doorway, and that the universe itself was far stranger and more beautiful than anyone had ever dared to imagine.